Amen. Join with us in our sermon reading, John 11:25 through 26. Powerful, powerful words for us today, and it's just so excited to get to this. And Jesus is talking with Martha at this point. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? So we've been looking at these I am statements that Jesus made, and it's just Jesus saying, get to know me. God's revelation of self, where he can meet the deepest human needs that we have. God's revelation of self and truth that we share with the world and that we're called to share with the world. And so today, I think this is the most encouraging and hope-filled claim of them all that Jesus makes when he says that statement, I am the resurrection and the life. Really, if you look at this in the original language, it might just say, I am the resurrection and life, not the life, but I am life. That's a powerful statement that Jesus makes. You know, I remember in seminary, I gave a message on this very passage that I had to do for a class. And the content of it was so powerful when I read through it and I studied it and saw everything that was in there that I got done preaching that message. And I literally thought this might be the best message that has ever been preached in the history of the world. That just came out right here, right now. And of course, then now I look back on that little kid back then that was preaching and say, oh man, do you have a lot to learn before you really can get out there and start sharing messages the way that you can and that you should. But it was the content of this passage that was so overwhelming to me because of this claim. And because of Jesus' claim in this passage, truly Jesus is our hope. He's our faith, our destiny, our very life. See, today we're going to hit right to the heart of the deepest of human needs that we have, all of us, all of humanity. Scripture tells us that humanity has long feared or been enslaved to the fear of death. In fact, if we look here, Hebrews chapter 2 says this, only as a human being could he, Jesus, die, and only by dying could he break the power of the devil, the one who had the power of death. And only in this way could he set free all who have lived their lives as slaves to the fear of death or dying. See, the worst part of the curse of sin is death. Sin, its originator, brought death into this world. Romans 6:23, for the wages of sin is death. Death to every aspect of life, the abundant life that God wants for us and created for us to live. You know, death is nothing more than separation. If we die physically in this world, what is it? Our spirit is separated from our physical body. That's death. Spiritual death is nothing more than separation. Our spirit, who we are, separated from a loving, holy, life-giving God because of this thing called sin. Death is just separation. But death is a part of this world. It's a part of the process of this world. And Jesus' words today tell us that we do not have to fear death. We can dislike it. We can hate it. We can grieve over it, just like Jesus does in this passage, I believe. But we do not have to fear it. See, we're talking about the very depths of the deepest universal human question and need. This mystery of death strickens us. What do we do with it? But Jesus is our hope and our answer. In fact, as we looked a handful of weeks ago, Revelation 1, and when I saw him, this is John, he sees this, he's in a vision, he sees Jesus. When I saw him, I fell as dead at his feet, and he laid his right hand upon me and said, do not be fearful, don't be afraid. I'm the first and the last. I'm the living one. I became dead, I was dead, but look, I am alive forevermore, and I hold the keys of death and of Hades, of the grave. See, John is going to give us this progression of this event where Jesus reveals he has power over death and the grave. And that's good news for us today, folks. So here's where it begins. Lazarus of Bethany is ill. He's the brother of Martha and Mary. And in the passage, John 11, as it begins, he says, now Mary, this is the Mary who anointed Jesus' feet with this really, really expensive perfume oil that normally is only used at times for burials and things of that nature, but it's very expensive. Now, it's interesting that he throws that out there in chapter 11 because John doesn't even talk about this or write about this until chapter 12. But we have to understand there's a power between in this connection between these two chapters. See, if you go to chapter 12 and you look through verses 1 through 10, we find out that Mary has this incredibly extravagant act and sacrifice and gift that she gives to Jesus. It's almost like a thank offering that she offers up. And of course, Judas gets mad at her because Judas was the one who kept the money bag, we find out. And Judas gets mad and he says, oh man, we shouldn't have wasted all this pouring this out on Jesus' feet. We should have just sold it and then we could have given money, we could have helped the poor. And like John says immediately after that, he said Judas didn't care about the poor because he kept the money bag and he constantly helped himself to the money out of it anyways for himself. He just wanted more money for himself. But Jesus says, leave her alone, because he connects it to his burial that's going to happen 6 days later. It's a foreshadowing of Jesus' impending death that's coming. Now, it's interesting because John tells us that there's a large crowd to see Lazarus right then and there, and they came to see him because he had been raised from the dead. It's a powerful thought. See, more foreshadowing of the resurrection and life that comes after the grave. And the religious leaders, we find out, John even tells us, were plotting to kill Lazarus. Can you believe that? The religious leaders wanted to kill Lazarus because people were seeing him. They knew he'd been in the grave for 4 days and now he's walking around alive, and they were believing in Jesus. And he said, we can't have that kind of stuff going on. Isn't that amazing? So let's take a jump back from chapter 12. Now we're going back to chapter 11 because the raising of Lazarus is a big deal. Now back in chapter 11, we find out that Lazarus is from Bethany. Now Bethany is just like 2 miles. I wish I had my laser pointer, but it's not on this one. He's about 2 miles from Jerusalem. Jesus is not there. Jesus was up in that area, but they tried to kill him just a few days ago. So he took off, and he's back down over here by the Jordan River. He's hanging out. He's got a little vacation time. He's resting. Okay, a little R&R, I said, a little rest and resurrection happening for him. Just kidding. Rest and, you know how it is. So here's Jesus getting away from it all for a few days because in the next week and a half, he's going to go through a cross, the grave, and an empty tomb. So they send word to him. Mary and Martha send word and they say, Lazarus is sick. And Jesus says, well, it's not going to end in death. It's not mortal. But this has happened so that the glory of God might be revealed, specifically so that Jesus might be glorified and they might believe. And then John puts this interesting thing. He says, and Jesus loved them. He keeps throwing that in there. And I don't think he's saying that like here's God and he loves everybody. You know how that is. I think he's saying Jesus has a real emotional attachment as a human being to this human family, okay? He loves them just like you love your family and your friends. He loves them. It's interesting, though, because Lazarus must have died shortly after the message was even sent down to where Jesus is. And he must have known this, and yet he makes this amazing statement. This illness, he says, resulted in temporary death, but God's glory and power are going to be demonstrated in resurrection and life. It's an interesting side note I thought was really cool. They were doing some archaeology around the town of Bethany. It's a small place. I wouldn't call it a city. It's just a small town. And in 1873, they found this tomb, and inside of it there was an ossuary inscription in the tomb, and it said, Mary, Martha, Lazarus. It's almost like God said, see, this happened. This was real. This was a tomb right here, and something happened that was amazing. So Jesus, down around the Jordan River, stays 2 more days before he travels back up by Jerusalem to Judea. This is kind of problematic, you think, isn't it? You say, why would he wait? Why in the world would you wait? See, the sisters both come to Jesus as he gets there at different times, and they say, Jesus, if you just would have come sooner, my brother would still be alive. He wouldn't be dead. But to me, this is kind of encouragement. To me, it's like we understand that it's a part of this life now for us to pass through death in order to experience resurrection life, as it's happened here. I mean, Jesus knew what he was going to do. There was a plan. And the disciples say to Jesus, Jesus, you probably shouldn't go back up there, because if you go back up there, they were trying to kill you, and that's not a good place for you to be. And yet Jesus tells them there are 12 hours of daylight. You have to walk when it's light. You can't walk at nighttime because you're going to stumble in the darkness. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, this is my 11th hour. I know there's very little daylight left, and this is the path I have to carry out and I have to do. This is a path and a purpose and a plan I've got to accomplish here because God's going to be glorified. You're going to find something incredibly powerful in the midst of this, and your belief is going to skyrocket because of this. So I have to go make this thing happen. And then he tells them, Lazarus is asleep, but I'm going to wake him up. And of course, they don't understand, so they say, oh, well, Jesus, if he's sleeping, that's good, because if you're sick and you're asleep, you get better, right? So Jesus has to talk to him very plainly. Lazarus is dead. He's dead. And I'm glad, for your sakes, that I wasn't there. And you think, what are you talking about, Jesus? Wouldn't it have been great? Because Jesus, I'm sure hundreds of times had walked by someone, touched them, healed them in their sickness, and they were better. Jesus says, I didn't want to do that again. I'm going to show you something more powerful this time. I'm going to show you that I have the power of life. I have power over death and the grave, and it's for your benefit that I wasn't there and that he has died, because you're going to see something amazing. Amazing. God's power and God's glory. See, what they're going to see is going to kindle their belief. It's going to embolden their faith. I think it can happen for us today as well. It truly can. So Thomas says, well, Jesus, if you're going, we might as well all go with you, and we can go die with you there too. I thought, now Thomas is always known for the doubter, right? He's a doubter. But in this statement, it's really one of faith. He's saying, Jesus, we don't know what the fate is as we go there, but we're with you no matter what. I mean, that's a powerful statement. So they head off. They arrive and find that Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days, and there's many people visiting the sisters, and they're there grieving with him. This is interesting. Rabbis held this belief that the soul would come back to the grave for 3 days, but by the 4th day, the soul was gone, and death was irreversible at that point. But Jesus comes to prove him wrong. He goes beyond 3 days and waits till the 4th day and shows up. Just like John 5 that we had read, Jesus says, just as the Father has life, he's given it to me to give life to whoever I choose to give it to. See, I'm the one with the power of life. If you believe in me, Jesus says, you've passed out of death into life. Don't be amazed by this. You're going to hear my voice and you're going to live. In fact, don't be amazed by this. The people are going to be in their graves, literally. They're going to hear my voice and they are going to come out to life. Powerful stuff Jesus already talked about back in chapter 5. So Martha comes out and meets Jesus. Mary stays back in the home. Jesus, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. But yet I know and I believe that God will do whatever you ask. I think it's as an expression of our faith in Jesus and his power. I think it's also kind of an implied request maybe to say, Jesus, if you want to try and do something, I wouldn't stop you to make this happen. Jesus says, oh, your brother's going to rise again. Martha says, I know, in the resurrection of the last day, you've talked about these things, Jesus, and someday again, he'll rise again. So Jesus makes this incredible statement. And he says, I am the resurrection. I am life. The one who believes in me will live even if they die, and the one who lives and believes in me will never, ever die. Do you believe this? I'm authorized to give life. You're going to hear my voice, and you will live. Live. I think what Jesus is telling us is that I'm life. I'm the source of life. I'm the origin of life. I'm the one who sustains life. And if you're connected to me, you have life. It doesn't matter if you physically die in this world. That does not matter. If you're connected to me, you are connected to the very source of life, and you have life. Is that not a powerful thought? You have life. I don't think Jesus is saying I'm alive. I'm life. We know our physical bodies here are destined for death. The curse of sin has brought death here. But it doesn't have to bring fear with it. In fact, it can actually bring hope of true, abundant, eternal life that's found in God. Jesus goes on to say, the one who believes in me shall never, ever die. In the original language, the words there are ukme, which is a double negative. Now, in English, what does a double negative mean? A positive, right? In Greek, a double negative means it's an impossibility. Cannot happen. If you believe in me, it is impossible for you to die. So you'll never have to worry about a spiritual death being separated from God's presence and glory. Do you believe this? In fact, and that's the question I think Jesus asks us today. Do you believe this today? Honestly? Do you believe this? Because I truly believe today, at this moment, at 11:54, October 22, 2017, you can have the assurance of life. Anybody want that today? Anybody need that today? Anybody grasp a hold of that today? As a pastor, I talk to so many people, and they say, well, when it comes to heaven, they go, well, I hope I make it there. I hope. I'm trying really hard, preacher. And I say, you don't have to talk that way. You can say, I know. Why? I have assurance because I believe in Jesus, and Jesus is life, and I'm connected to Jesus, so I have life. There's no other way around it. Do you have that assurance today? Those physically dead and in the graves, Jesus says, they're going to hear my voice and they're going to come out and they are going to live. See, Jesus is not only the one who gives resurrection or bestows life. He says, I am the resurrection and I am life. Soon Lazarus is going to come out, come back to life, and live again. And it's going to be a sign to everyone that Jesus has the power of life. He has the power over death and over the grave. It's a precursor to Jesus in the coming week because he is going to die. But as he dies, he's going to change everything because he is going to conquer death in death's own territory. On death's home field, he's going to go right into the grave. He's going to conquer it. And he's going to come out the other side and say, here's life, everybody. Woo-hoo. I know for us, death seems so powerful, so final. We fear it. We grieve it. We feel insignificant in its presence. And yet in Jesus, we don't have to fear death. In fact, in Jesus, we are death defiers now. Because he's offering us true, abundant, eternal life, and it cannot be taken away. And this truly is our hope. So Mary then comes out to meet Jesus. She says the same thing. If you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But Jesus looks out and he sees the sisters and he sees the friends and the family that are there, and they're crying and they're grieving. And Jesus is literally touched in spirit. And it says that he almost makes a snorting sound because he's upset. And we read these powerful two words in this verse. Jesus wept. Almost in the original language, he burst into tears. And they say, oh, look how he loved him. But why didn't he save him? I mean, he healed others. Why didn't he save him? It's almost the same thing. Jesus is going to be in a week later hanging upon the cross, and they're going to say, oh, he saved other people. Why can't he save himself? And Jesus says, because I didn't come here to live forever. I came here to conquer death, and that's what I'm getting ready to do. Wow. See, I think Jesus is weeping. And it might just be one of the most beautiful pictures in the whole scene. It's puzzling, I know. Jesus knew he was going to raise Lazarus, so why would he cry? And one theory is that, well, because Jesus knew he was going to raise Lazarus, and it only could be that he's crying and upset because people are not believing in him, and that's what it is. But I think the evidence of this whole story points to something completely different. Everybody at the scene looked at him and said, look at how much he loved him and why he's crying in the midst of this scenario. See, I think the evidence points to the fact that Jesus was simply, truly incarnate. Yes, he was God, but he was fully human. And he shared the very common lot of humanity. He was moved to emotion. He felt grief. He felt pain. He felt loss. He felt sympathy. See, I think he saw the situation of loved ones in pain and grieving, and it moved him. And I think he wasn't only grieving the loss of someone that he loved and the pain of people out there that he loved. I think he was grieving literally the curse of sin itself and the havoc and the pain and the destructiveness that it brings with it. Remember what we found out last week? The enemy comes to do nothing more than steal, kill, and destroy, but I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly. And he sees it. And I can put it this way. I have done many, many funerals, scores of funerals. Well over 100. I'm not sure I'm quite to 200 yet, but I might be. I've done a lot of funerals. I've done funerals from people who I had no clue who that person was, or people even out there that I talked to. I've done funerals where I loved the person who was there dearly. I've done funerals where people who were there, I have no clue where their faith life was. And I had done funerals for people who I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt their belief in Jesus and that they were with Jesus. But I'll tell you the truth. Even if it's a person who knows Jesus, even if it's a person that I wouldn't even know, when I stand up at the end of the funeral and I look out and I see family and friends who come up and they weep and they grieve, and there's this loss that they feel within their lives, I get emotional. And it's hard for me because I literally could burst into tears and at times have cried because, not because of the person who I think is there with God in heaven, but because of this grief and loss in the way humanity is, in the way that life is here. And it's powerful. And I think that just maybe Jesus was like that. He knew he was going to rise again, only to die again. But he looked out on these people that he loved, and he saw them in grief and despair. And he was just moved with emotion. And he wept. What a connection of Jesus with us and humanity. Maybe, just maybe, Jesus was reminded again as to why he came to this earth. This is why I'm getting ready to endure a cross a week from now, because I'm going to end this thing right here. And in just over a week, he would conquer death and the grave forever. So they go to the tomb. They roll away the stone, and Martha says, "Oh, please don't roll away the stone because he's been in there 4 days. He's going to stink." Jesus says, "Didn't I tell you? If you believed, you were going to see the glory of God right here." And Jesus begins to pray. And he prays and says, "Lord, I thank you that you hear me. I know you always do, and this prayer is not really for you and me, but it's for all the people right here so that they might believe at the amazing thing that's going to happen and know." And Jesus calls out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And Lazarus walks out of the tomb, still wrapped tightly in grave clothes, and they unbind him. See, Lazarus coming out of the tomb is a foreshadowing of what one day will happen to us. Lazarus comes back to a continuation of this mortal life. He's going to die again, and he does. But in this scene, Jesus reveals that he has power over death and the grave. And it's only after Jesus' death and resurrection a week later where we now are called out to the resurrection life. See, when Jesus left the tomb, we find out in chapter 20 of John that his grave clothes are still sitting there, and he is elsewhere, different, changed. It's a whole new world. And I think that's symbolic of who we can be and who we're going to be. But folks, this is our faith and our hope. Being sure of what we hope for, certain of what we do not yet see, but know to be true. I'm the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? It's a question we all are going to have to answer. Do you have this hope today? Are you standing firm on this hope today? Because you can. To believe in Jesus, to believe in the work that Jesus did in conquering the grave and giving life, we are told that we have life. And we can have the full assurance that we have that life. True, abundant, and eternal. But there's one more point I got to get to. Metaphorically speaking, is there anybody here who feels like you're still in a dark, damp, dreary tomb? Life's escaping you. The curse of sin is still dominating in aspects of your life. You're trying to break free. I'm telling you this morning, Jesus not only calling you out of that dark tomb, he literally went into that dark grave and saying, come on out with me because I'm going to give you life. Anybody here says, man, that's what I feel like, but I want more. I'm going to tell you a story that's very personal for me. And I don't tell this story very often at all. And I told the first service, I'll tell you the same thing. I'm telling you this because I love you. Okay? When I was younger, I had a very dear person whom I loved dearly have, for lack of any better term, a vision from God. And this vision that this person saw so often was connected to me and my ministry and the things that were going to be happening in my ministry. And one part of this vision this person saw, they watched me walk into a grave and go and be in there. And that person got very scared by it. They were like, oh, I don't like that. and I didn't necessarily like it when I heard it either, so we started praying. And right after we started praying, that person saw me come out of the grave, and as I came out of the grave, there were all these people following me out. And so I prayed, and God said, this is your ministry. You are literally going to go into the grave where people are, and you're going to lead them out to light and to life and to freedom. This is who you are and what you are called to do. And so I'm just saying this for you today. Any church I'm going to be a part of, guess what? This is my ministry. I am going to constantly be looking for persons who are still in those places where they're saying, I'm stuck here in this grave, this place where death, it still reigns, this place where bondage, it still reigns, and I don't know how to get out of this place. But we know how. Because Jesus went in there and conquered that thing and said, come on out and find life. Find life. Leading people out of darkness and death and bondage into light and life and freedom. And if you need this today, this could be you. It could be you. You can find freedom from that dark, dreary grave. And it's always going to be my mission. It's always going to be my passion. But it needs to be our mission and our passion. We need to share this with our neighborhood and our community and literally the world, that Jesus is the resurrection and he is the life, and he's calling us out of darkness and into his light, and he is calling us out of the grave into life, and he's calling us out of bondage into freedom. Will you join him? You know, in John 14:19, Jesus says, you will live because I live. He's conquered this thing called the grave. And now we get this wonderful chance to share this message. So today, I don't know. Today, there's three things. You can have the assurance of life by believing in Jesus and all that he did and connecting yourself to the one who's the very source and origin of life, and you can say, I have life and I'm assured of it today. Maybe some of you say, I just need that assurance, and this today you got it. Maybe some of you say, man, I still feel like I'm in that tomb and I need to get out of here. Come to the light and the life and you're going to find it. But number three, maybe it's just for us to make a commitment to say, we're going to do this. As a church, this is what we're about and what we're going to do. So whatever you need today, would you take a moment? Would you pray? And would you find it? Because we've got one final song we're going to sing. And we're going to celebrate this today.